Should I look?
This is so much more interesting than what I usually have to talk to people about. But then again, it's kind of what I have been talking to people about more and more in the news. I made notes. I went through the book very carefully. There really is so much in this book that will defy expectation, if I might brag on it for a moment. Don't worry, I'm going to cut you down for about 35 minutes, but first I'll start positive. There really is something, this is a topic that almost all of us in this room don't know clinically the way Esther does. So for us, it's anecdotal, it's empirical, it's episodic. And when you look through the book, the different chapters are a beautiful diagram of breaking through your own expectations, your own delusions, your own illusions. So I was really impressed.
Now start chopping me.
No, yeah, right. But on page 47, there's a gross error. No, so the topic itself, the 10 Commandments, 2, arguably 3, deal with this issue. We were talking backstage. I just did a quick little bit of research. In the last 3 years in New York State, now that we don't have the same process for dissolution of marriage anymore, you have functionally no-fault divorce, well over 50% of the filings are infidelity-based. And we now know that well over 50% of marriages end. So this is rampant. This is epidemic. So I love your language when you say universally forbidden and universally practiced. So I want to pose to you the question that you pose here in the beginning of your book. Where should we begin? When you want to take people through this topic, where's the right place to start?
I'm going to read it.
Please.
That probably actually answers part of your question. When I first became interested in the topic of infidelity, I used to ask audiences if anyone had ever experienced an affair. Not surprisingly, no hands went up. There are not many people who will publicly admit to fooling around or being fooled. Bearing this in mind, I changed my question to how many of you have been affected by infidelity in your lives? Overwhelmingly, hands went up, and have done so in every audience I have addressed this query. By the way, it's generally around 80%. When I ask, the children of, the lover in, the friend whose shoulder is wet from the tears, the friend who is listening to the stories, and of course the 2 major protagonists. A woman saw a friend's husband kissing a beautiful stranger on the train. Now the question of whether or not she should tell her hangs heavy over her friendship. A teenage girl discovered that her father's double life was as old as she was. A mother cannot fathom why her son has stayed with that hussy, as she refers to her daughter-in-law, no longer welcome at Sunday dinners. The echoes of secret and lies resound across generations, leaving unrequited love and shattered hearts in their wake. I'll continue afterwards. But where I start is basically, here is this subject that is ubiquitous, that is the only commandment that is repeated twice in the Bible, once for doing it and once just for thinking about it. And
it's funny because it's true.
And it has existed since marriage was invented. And in many ways, it has a tenacity that marriage can only envy. And yet, it is often treated with great judgment, in very polarizing ways. And I thought we can do better. We need a new conversation. We need a new model that helps people, that is more compassionate, that is more empathic, and helps people deal with this crisis. Helps them get through it, make sense of it, and then decide what they want to do afterwards. So how I began is by questioning. Generally, when I start with a topic, I start by looking at what was I told, how was I trained, what do I want to question here? Does this really appear the way that I was told it was? And if not, I start to go one by one at all the assumptions that underlie the conversation. Because if I change the assumptions, I change the practice.
However, one of the fundamental problems here is that you are asking for people to have an open mind on something that has always been culturally very absolute, despite the ubiquitousness of it. It's wrong. And if we discuss it in any way where you mitigate the wrongness at all, that's dangerous.
Right.
So I can't have an open mind. It has to be wrong,
Right.
and if it ever happens, they're gone.
Right.
How do you get past that?
Well,
Are you going back to the book?
I'm going back to the book because this was literally, I couldn't move in the book until I had answered these questions, right? Every time I would tell people I'm writing, they would say, are you for or against? As if there's only two options, and I would say yes.
That's
You
good.
know, and maybe with a more cryptic answer, I could try to uncover some of the deeper layers of this issue. I have, every time I say I write about this, I say, this is not a justification, this is not a condoning, understanding doesn't make it right, and sometimes things are hurtful, that doesn't mean they're wrong. And this is a big cultural distinction.
Now, the numbers aren't that different when you cross the pond to Europe versus the United States. But how about the cultural affectations? How is this received in the United States versus, let's say, in France?
So, I have a French accent, but I am not French.
But you said in France earlier, that's why I
Yes,
said it.
because
Don't
it
try
is
to
the
catch
kind of-
me in the wrong cultural reference.
It's presented as the kind of on the other side of this culture. I think probably one of the big differences between a Latin European perspective and here is that it doesn't hurt any less. Let's be very clear. It doesn't hurt any less. But it isn't always experienced as wrong. It is experienced as hurtful. It doesn't have the same moral code attached to it. And it can be just as gutting. Betrayal is betrayal, deception is deception, lies is lies. But there is something about one's understanding that such thing can happen. It's a bit of a yielding to the reality of life that you get. So there is less of a shock that this could happen to me. That is probably one of the nuances of difference. And you're right, the numbers are not different. Infidelity is the leading cause of divorce, or one of them at this point, not different in Denmark or in France or in the US. And that is what I think is really important for us to understand, is what are the ravages of modern infidelity? How has this become the reason for ending relationships to the extent that it does? Does it hurt differently today than it used to? What is specific to modern love and to the way we experience the breaches of trust and the betrayals of love today?
Deep. One of the aspects of this, it is deep. It makes me uncomfortable, but I want to know more. I feel like, well, I shouldn't be too curious. It's not easy. You're lucky that you guys have the lights on you, because I know there's a lot of, not me. I would never. What she just said, I've never thought that in my life. But why is that page folded over? Because it's so not who I am.
Tell them what your wife told you.
You threw me there for a second. So my wife, when I was getting ready to do this, my wife had heard about the book and a talk from a different friend. And when she saw the book in the apartment, she said, "What are you reading that for? That's far too deep for you, this book." And I said, "I thought it was about how to start fires here in the..." So language matters. You spend a lot of time, and it's one of the things that's helpful, I think, in the discursiveness of this book is language. Non-monogamists as a category is something that will be an interesting proposition for people, non-monogamous. And fooling around, even as loose vernacular, you make a very strong case that there's really nothing fooling around about infidelity. I know we refer to it that way, but that was probably some type of inoculation against the reality of what it truly is, that we started calling it fooling around. So let's start with that. Why do you think it was called that when clearly the hurt, the pain, and the realities of it fly in the face of that type of, harmless label?
Because certain words are meant to take the gravitas out of it. If you say I fooled around, you're trying to say, don't worry, it wasn't a big deal, it's not a real threat to us, it didn't mean anything. But there is a lot of feeling when you try to make something be meaningless. It doesn't mean there is no feeling in lack of meaning. So you come up with a language by which you're trying to do some false reassurance sometimes that also curtails your accountability, and you say, it was just fooling around. The whole vocabulary of this topic is, could be a study on its own. There is no morally neutral terms. The language is often so judgmental that it clasps in its bosom the impossibility of talking about it, and it actually stops the conversation. Every time I would write a line, I would feel like I had 3 others that I needed to add in order to round it up, in order to because everything when it stood alone, just took on a meaning of its own, and then it just took off. And I felt like I had to constantly qualify it, contextualize it, layer it, so that it really took on the truth of life and the fact that love is messy and infidelity even more so.
Non-monogamists.
Yes.
Sounds like a pass.
Like a pass.
Sounds like they're going to get a pass. People won't want to call people non-monogamists because we're supposed to be monogamous if we're in the marrying state of mind. Although it was a great quote, 1908, G.B. Shaw, paraphrasing, that marriage is among the most insane, delusive passions that requires you to swear that you will remain in that state until death.
I know that quote.
Which was smart once I read it 3 times, because my wife was right. I didn't get it the first time. Was that you come into it, you'd make a distinction between eroticism, marriage, romance. The language matters. These things mean different things. You come into it in one state of mind through passion that is not the sustaining principle in most of these true partnerships of marriage. And that's something people don't know when they get into it. And they can't figure out how to reconcile when they're trying to figure out whether or not they have to get out of it. So this whole discussion, this whole topic is right in the center of it. So how do you get people open to the idea that they need to look at the infidelity as more than just its own reality? You know what I mean? That it's more important to examine, to be open to, than just the fact that it happened. Because that's where we end our analysis, right?
So many people will tell me that in the aftermath of an affair, they are actually having conversations with a level of depth and honesty that they haven't had in years.
Is this the non-monogamist?
No.
Or is this the other?
This is the couple.
This is both of them?
Both people.
Okay.
Look, some affairs are break it. So I don't get to see much of that. They go to the lawyer. The others come to me. So I have people that want to remake it. It's different. Or they want to figure out if there is something left with which to remake something. And they may or may not do that together. But they are giving each other some time. Otherwise, it's not me they call. And when I say the non-monogamous, I needed, what was I going to call these people all the time? Cheaters? Betrayers? Philanderers? Perfidy? Womanizer? Slut? What's the vocabulary? So I chose one of each.
I don't know, but that was all very effective. I want you to know.
I'd used every word I could. And on occasion, I also could use the one that was not monogamous because I began to understand a number of things, and one of them was that if I just called this person the betrayer, there were times when, in fact, this betrayal was one of many in the relationship. And that betrayal sometimes comes in many forms. Indifference, neglect, contempt, violence. It was often very tempting to want to see this betrayal as the one that tops all others. And society is on the side of the person who went elsewhere, not on the person, society is on the side of the person who withheld, not on the person who went elsewhere. And so I also, on occasion, just called it non-monogamous, not because it was an endorsement of anything, but it was one descriptor to say this person wasn't less committed, this person wasn't less of a parent, this person wasn't less of a breadwinner, this person was the one who was non-monogamous.
What do you see as the right way to approach an understanding of whether or not something can be learned from the infidelity? So you're sitting in there in the room with one of them, if you're lucky, both of them. And this comes out as something where they believe this is the end of the conversation. This happened, that's it. There's nothing worth talking about. There's no value in this other than the fact that it happened. How do you see the infidelity? What are the possibilities of positive growth that come out of something like that?
So, if you come to me the day after, I will tell you, in this moment, you have just been broken, shattered, gutted. You don't believe anything. I know you don't trust him or her, but I also know that you probably don't even trust yourself and your own perception. It isn't just because you feel like you've lost your partner, but you sometimes feel like you have lost your sense of self. You have a crisis of identity. You are undergoing at this moment, this is not all in one breath, you know, the shattering of the grand ambition of love, which is really why I think this has become so beyond painful in the way more than it used to be. And I normalize it. And I say to the other person, did you imagine this? Did you at any moment consider this? And, you know, sometimes they have and sometimes they haven't. And when they see the person break in front of them, it is just unbearable to know that I am the one who caused that. The next thing I want to see in the learning is the person who hurt the other person able to have remorse and guilt for what they have done? Even if they think that what they experienced there was very important to them, you still created something here. Are you able to own that? And that means that you have to be able to take in with empathy the pain, the raw pain that is in front of you. And then from there, we go through a trajectory that covers the crisis phase, and then the insight phase, and then the vision phase. And one of the things that I know will help people in what they will learn is not the first phase. The first phase, I can go into details, but it really is, you know, what I do is I provide calm, structure, reassurance. And sometimes I have to say, your experience and your feelings about the affair are not the same as your experience and your feelings about your entire 26 years together. Don't make this become the fatal blow that redefines all of that, because it's not always like this. For everything I'm going to say there is other examples. You know, it's like, so. Then, if I see people who are able, in the midst of this fracas, to also say, you know, but I know that while this was going on, you know, he or she has been there for my dying parent. He or she has been there.
Like Dawson in the book, one of the, I'm sure that's not his real name, but one of the people, I just want to interrupt because I thought it was an interesting flip on this. So Dawson is one of the people in the book, one of the couples that has been through the therapy, and he says, I was there for you when your brother came to live with us. I was there with the cancer. I was there for you with all these things. You can't just judge me by where I, and then there's a different phrase that he uses, alone. You can't judge me by this alone. How often is there any type of positive reception to that idea?
It depends when in the process. 2 days after? No. I couldn't, you know. seriously, you have lost your entire quota of entitlement. You are done. You have lost your entire credibility.
There's a lot of you in this conversation.
Yes, I mean, not you.
There's a lot of people here. You can pick any of them. Yeah.
This is me talking to Dawson. At that moment...
Go ahead, keep going. I got to get up in 2 hours and 15 minutes. Now I'll never go to sleep. I want you to know that. So,
no, to Dawson,
so immediately you can't do that because you have no sense of entitlement. You have no leverage.
No. In the beginning, it's all about... In the first moment, the focus is on the person who has just woken up. One person's nightmare may be ending, but the other one has just started. Let's be very clear. You may have told this, because you couldn't sleep anymore 3 years later, because you wanted to be good, because you wanted to come clean. Did you do this for me, or did you do this for you? So now
wait, I'm not sure what I'm being accused of right now. So you're saying
you.
that when he comes forward, when Dawson says, okay, I admit it, that's for him.
Sometimes.
That's not doing anything that's reconciliatory.
It's worth checking, yes. Sometimes you really want to know, did you do this because you were actually thinking that that's what your partner wants to know, or did you do this to cleanse your conscience? And what is the other person to do with this now?
You've got them all against me now. Are you happy?
I have worked, I think it's important to kind of say, when you say it's not his name, I had 1,500 letters after I gave the TED Talk about affairs. The majority of the people who wrote to me were hurt men and straying women, the two groups that talked the least. Then I went around the globe, and I have worked with hundreds, thousands of people on this thing, and there is not one word in this book that is invented. But that also says that there isn't one story. This is a broad topic. When you go into the Dawson, he happened to have been there for his wife, and then he says to her, and this is going to become everything about me. I've heard that. But I've also heard, where he was nowhere to be seen, where he's emptied the life savings. This is a he that I'm thinking about, and those words coming out of this, or another guy who I think he wrote about him, and I remember he was like, I would never, the curse word,
sure.
I would never, I at least am not sleeping in this, and he meanwhile had mistreated her terribly for years. And I finally just really had to say, my dear, betrayal comes in many forms. You really think you have the moral superiority because you didn't do that. And to myself, I thought, maybe you're just not nice enough.
See, that's the
and
tricky part of this. The whole thing is just... That hits home also. This is a sticky wicket, this entire discussion, which is why the book's genius in its actuality, in its authenticity, is very helpful. Because as Esther is saying, there's nothing really, it's all subjective, right? Of course it is. But that these are actual clinical experiences is very helpful in understanding it, because this idea of, okay, you did the bad thing, but now we have to be open to this discussion of, well, what is a bad thing? What is perfidy? What is a breach of faithfulness? What is the breach of the vow? And if somebody, you'll hear this, it didn't happen for no reason. Now that is another tricky component of this, because you can't blame the victim. But in the therapeutic setting, you wind up coming around to the idea of, well, if we want to see something, if we want to sustain, if we want to persist after this event, we have to understand what went into it. I read it, I get it, I remember it from your first book as well. That is not an easy thing to coach the victim through. Because why does somebody want to be open to what it is that they could have possibly done that would make this person do something that was so obvious and hurtful?
That is never the way I think. You created a causality now.
Yes.
By which and then it becomes blaming the victim.
Yes.
I am looking at a context. There is a relationship. I look at the relationship in its entirety. And I want to know, is there something that happened in the context of the relationship that was going on as well, you still made your choice alone. Two people are responsible for the relationship. One person chooses to have an affair. That is very clear. But sometimes these experiences have nothing to do with the relationship. That is one of the biggest surprises for me in writing.
Explain that. How can it have nothing to do with the relationship?
I love my wife. I love my husband. I love my husband between two men, two women. I'm having an affair. I have no intention of leaving. I have no intention of going anywhere else. What we have is dear to me. I am experiencing something I never in my lifetime thought I would do. The majority of people that I see are not chronic philanderers. They are people who have often been faithful for years, decades. They themselves find themselves crossing a line they never thought they would cross. And then I begin to find out, what is it? And that idea, what you have just said, is one of the big assumptions that guides the conversation at this moment. Affairs are a symptom of a problem relationship. Either there's something wrong in your relationship, either there's something wrong in you. But it is a symptom model. It's a deficiency model. And in fact, sometimes the meanings and the motives have to do with loneliness and resentment and rejection and sexual frustration and all the negative stuff that can happen. But sometimes it has nothing to do with that. And that, to me, became much more interesting. It's like in Mating in Captivity. Well, I would not have written a book about people who don't get along and don't want to be sexually intimate with each other. That's, so what? But people who would come in and say, we love each other very much, we have no sex, that became really a question for me. And the same thing began to happen here. My partner is an amazing person, and they go on and on and on, and I'm having an affair, which is not always described as I'm having an affair. Sometimes is, can you love two people at the same time? The questions become very different. And from that place, I decided that I'm not going to always look at it, blanket, as just a symptom, but I will look at it for its own meaning. And when you explain that to a partner, it's a very different story. This has nothing to do with you. You had a good relationship, and you are an incredible partner. The fact that you're going to understand what may have happened, how you lost each other, how you became complacent to each other, how you ceased to have any depth with each other, all those things that happen in marriages, that is not a cause, that is not a blame. And to shift the conversation from reaction to reflection, from blame to understanding, is ultimately what helps people overcome this, so that they don't destroy everything they had because of that. Sometimes it has to, but not always.
What do you think the numbers are?
Look, I did not deal with numbers because the numbers are from 28 to 70%, all depending on the definition.
There's too much subjectivity in terms of the actual circumstances.
There is no universally agreed upon definition of infidelity. So I went for the stories behind it. I worked like an ethnographer, story after story, to try to see, are there themes here? And I came up with a few themes that I hear for the people who do it, so that when I would ask myself, why do people do this thing? Why would people risk losing everything they have built together? For what? For what? And it's not for sex. Not only. It's a little more complicated than that. So we don't know the numbers. If there's a subject that people lie about, it's sex. And even more so, forbidden sex. So men exaggerate, men boast, men inflate, and women have always had to face much more dire consequences, including the 9 countries where she can still be killed for straying, and so she has learned to be quiet. But we don't know the truth about these things. All we know in the past is that there were all kinds of babies that didn't have the color of your hair. And now we don't have that anymore. So now what is it? Is it porn? Is it a chat room? Is it a massage with a happy ending? Is it going back on Facebook to reconnect with your exes? Is it staying active on your dating apps while you're already seeing somebody for X amount of time? Where is that line?
You say that the line is that there's an equation that what creates infidelity. Full disclosure, I was going to skip this over when I was going through the book. I was like, I know what it is. And I just read through a little bit. I was like, oh, actually, I really have no idea about where the line is and where it isn't. Because Esther poses these things, like, if the person's online, well, what is that? What if he never meets somebody? Or what if she never meets the person, but this is what? If it's just an emotional connection, there is no emotional connection. So you came up with 3 components: secrecy, sexual alchemy, which would be a great name for a band, by the way, and emotional involvement. So take us through that. How does that take shape? So, because we've been seeing this, right? I mean, with social media adaptations, and we know the scandals that we've seen publicly about it. But, well, I never met them. Well, it's just online. I don't even know who they are. How do you adapt these 3 components to it? And I get that the line and where you come up in the book is, it's subjective, obviously. People are going to weigh these things differently, of course. But how do those components play out in terms of what people should have in mind when they're analyzing behavior?
So I'm going to link this to something that you were asking me before. When I said to you that so many times people have these conversations afterwards. This, what I'm going to tell you now, is part of the conversations that you wish people would have when things are good in the relationship, not after a crisis. It's like this crisis propels you to the essence, and then you start to actually talk for real, because people avoid them before. And why is it subjective? It's subjective because you no longer have major religious institutions, and you no longer have pregnancy and mortality and some big things to kind of define the lines. Today on the internet, you can have massive amounts of engagement that are sexual without being physical. What does that mean? So I decided I would look at it structurally. By definition, an affair or any infidelity is organized around a secrecy. The secret is the constitutive element of this subject. If it's not secretive, it's about something else. And that secret, it has multiple ramifications because it is also intergenerational. It gets passed on from generation to generation, these secrets. They become part of the DNA of people's lives. The secret is corrosive on one side and can be very titillating on the other. The secret is, for many people, the place where for the first time they're actually experiencing something that is just their own. But then you need to match that with emotional involvement to one degree or another. I mean, even hit and run has a certain emotional component to it. So there is a human dimension to that, a human emotional experience to it. From a full love affair and a parallel life to an anonymous hookup. There is feeling. And then the most interesting one for me was the concept of sexual alchemy. And alchemy became the key word because when I would ask people all over the world, what is one thing that they experienced? The word that they came up.
Chemistry.
No.
Alchemy.
No.
What is it?
Alive.
Alive?
They feel alive.
I would have never come up with that. It doesn't matter how many words.
They feel alive. They feel like for the first time in a long time, they experience a sense of aliveness, of energy, of renewal, of vitality that they haven't felt in themselves or in their life in a long time.
Okay, so when they say that, the immediate pushback is, you are so selfish that you
Correct.
did that just for that with all these other responsibilities and things. You don't think that I want to feel alive? You get to go feel alive, and I'm not alive. And now, by the way, you killed me, essentially. So now you're alive, and I'm dead
That's
now
right.
because of what you did.
That's right. That is the shit show. That is true. That is true. It is selfish.
Welcome to my life.
It is selfish. Affairs are plots of entitlement. Affairs are things that you give to yourself with a host of rationalizations for why you deserve it. Yeah. Always. And indeed, sometimes my aliveness kills you, and you are going to tell me, you think I liked it the way this was? No, because now I have, an affair will light up the scorecard of a relationship. And all the compromises that you were willing to make for the greater good, you're done. Because I have taken out all the reasons for why you were willing to accept things that you didn't want to accept, but you didn't do what I did, which sometimes you're jealous about, which sometimes you're even jealous about. You would never do it, but you wished you could have done it. It's this kind of thing.
So you're mad at me twice, really. You're mad at me that I did it, and you're mad at me that I did it and you didn't.
Yes, yes.
Now that sounds like marriage. That's like a real, you know? That's where it really gets in there, you know? That's it. It's the heaviest piece of metal in the world. It's amazing the weight that comes with it.
So the alchemy...
Because that would never exist in any other relationship. You're mad at me for what I did, and you're mad because you didn't do it?
Yes.
That's only in marriage.
Yes.
That's
yes.
never in a business.
Yes.
Never or.
And it goes further, and it goes further. And then the alchemy is really this idea that, you know, the kiss that you only... The erotic is such that a kiss that you only imagine giving can be just as powerful as hours of lovemaking. You don't have to have the act to have the energy. Longing has fully understood that with your erotic mind, you can live an entire life, an entire love story in your head that takes you completely away from your partner without ever touching anybody.
And that's wrong. Because you really sold it when you said it there. That's why I was reminding them. It's not a how-to course that we're given here. The third component then winds up being the one that used to be said in isolation, emotional involvement, right? This is something that's been used as an excuse and an explanation time immemorial with this. She meant nothing. He meant nothing to me.
Versus it was just sex,
it was
therefore
just sex,
it meant nothing,
then,
or it was no sex, therefore it meant nothing.
And then in the social media, it's, okay, you never met them, but you're like really into them. You're connected to them. It's emotional, and that's even more hurtful than the physical. That's how we've seen those made manifest. What is your reckoning on that dynamic?
You know, for me to understand emotional infidelity,
this is from my wife. I knew this was going to happen. All right, these are just questions for later.
I know.
Yeah, I have all the time. I can't go home, so it's fine. Keep going. So the emotional involvement.
The emotional, what is called today emotional infidelity is that you have gone to someone else to share parts of yourself that you ought to share with me, that I expected you to share with me. And a part of that has to do, that concept of emotional infidelity really is rather recent, and it comes along with the more our marriages became the quest for the soulmate. So, do you understand? I'll explain. Listen, you can say it's right, it's wrong, it's right, wrong. I am trying to give dignity to the people, and if I'm just going to say one-word things, I will never help the people who come to me. Because I can think this is wrong, but I'm also seeing this person who still wants to live with this person. What am I going to say to this person? I'm going to shame him or her for still caring, loving, even admiring the person that has just cracked them open? And I have to be able to hold both things. That's why I continuously work from a dual perspective, what it did to me and what it meant for you. If I just go and I cut you, I also cut the lifeline of this person who sometimes wants to find a way to feel okay about still choosing to be with you, which today has often become the new shame. It used to be that divorce was the stigma. Now it's choosing to stay when you can leave. That's the new stigma. That's the Hillary Clinton story. And that means now that not only do I have your secret, but on top of it, I'm protecting you to my friends to whom I cannot talk now because they're going to judge me for not throwing the dog on the curb. So now I have a double secret. I lie about what you've done to me, and I lie to them about the fact that I still want to be with you. And because of that, I can't just go and throw these kinds of words at people, not in my role.
2 questions.
Yes.
One is for you, but I'll ask that second. I can't really see, so you
No,
have a
we
little
need
bit of
light
a
in the
degree of
house.
anonymity. No, it's better this way.
No? No, no, no.
I'll tell you
Really?
what.
Oh.
Who, after listening, because this is, objectively, this is very persuasive. This is somebody who's spent so many years understanding something, not just conceptually, but empirically, seeing it lived out. That's a dynamite combination. A show of hands, it's not the question you think it's going to be, although you deserve it after how you've been laughing at me for the last 35 minutes. Who is open to the idea that, God forbid, this ever happened, that God forbid this ever happened in your own life? God forbid. Nobody wants to have to deal with this. Although maybe there is something that positive that could come out of it, but we'll put that to the side. Who's even open to the possibility that you would try to weather that kind of storm and find a way through it and stay with the person? What a bunch of liars. Look at them all. Whatever. No,
I actually think that this is a more honest answer than the one you typically get.
I would have raised my hand if I were there, especially if I thought I had any eye contact with you. Okay, so that's interesting, right? Because
What do you make of this?
Me? Nothing. I ask questions. And my question for you, I've given enough. Here's my question for you. And I see how you've spelled it out here several different ways with the range of moral backstops that people have here. There's an interesting dialogue component to the book where it's, this happened, well, it's always wrong, that guy's got to go. And somebody said, well, hold on, that's we have to be a little bit more subjective. And then there's, no, it's not subjective. Do you ever think, maybe when you were coming up with non-monogamists as a concept, do you ever think to yourself, this is a really hard thing for people to be in successfully over a long time? That marriage really, really is work hard, not unnatural, but difficult. Difficult.
Okay.
Difficult.
May I?
Please.
So, our model today is that I want you to be whatever we always wanted from marriage: companionship, economic support, family life, social status. I also want you to be my best friend, my trusted confidant, my passionate lover, for the long haul, a long haul that's twice as long as it used to be. I want you to be the best parent, my intellectual equal, the one to inspire me in my career. I want you to be my anchor and my wave. I want you to offer me security and stability and predictability, and I want you to give me transcendence and awe and mystery and surprise. It's one person to give us what once an entire village used to provide. That is the modern concept. And it goes further. It goes further because there's a Jungian analyst, Robert Johnson, who I thought gave me something to think about that was really brilliant. In our secularized society, romantic love has become the most important engine of the Western psyche. So we turn to romantic love for things that we used to turn for in religion: ecstasy, meaning, wholeness, transcendence, all of those things we used to look for in the sanctuary of the divine. And today, I want you, my beloved, to offer all these things to me. So when you say marriage is work, I always ask you which model of marriage first. Then I will know which is the work we need to do. Marriages of today that manage to meet this, in which we conflate the spiritual and the relational by calling our partners our soulmates, do better than all the marriages of the past. That's the research of Eli Finkel in his new book. But the vast majority can't meet this new Olympus. You understand?
Why is it always that I don't understand? I'm thinking. This is deep. I keep telling you it's deep. So, it's deep. It's deep. You had 30 variables that go into the marriage.
Have you listened to what people tell each other in the vows these days when they get married?
When they make their own vows.
Oh my God.
I hate that part, when I have to listen to all that. Is that just me? I hear and I'm like, oh, listen to this guy with the... You know that he got a look at hers the day before and he just cranked it out. He called his one friend who was a lit major,
but he promises her the moon. You know, and you think, my God, if these people succeed till past the honeymoon, that will be amazing. It's like what people are, so it has always been, when you pick a person, you pick a story. And this is the story you're going to write together. And it has, you edit it. I one day came up with this line after mating, and it just became one of the most hopeful lines, actually, when I work with people who are struggling with infidelity. I said, most of us these days are going to have 2 or 3 marriages or 2 or 3 committed relationships in our adult life. Some of us are going to do it with the same person.
All right, so how does that manifest itself?
It means we got together and we had one particular contract with each other about interdependency, one particular style of relationship in which we negotiated what was separate and what was together, one particular power dynamic between the two of us, one set of rules around sexual boundaries between the two of us, all kinds of things that at some point, people renew their license regularly. People don't renew their marriage ever. They think that this thing that they began with in their 20s or 30s just is going to go like that for 30, 40 years without ever sitting down and just saying, how is this little enterprise of us doing? What's it like for you? Where are we at?
Shareholder meeting.
Yes, marriage shareholder meeting, in which people actually, but not from a consumer perspective, is this a good deal for me? Am I getting my needs met? But really, what have we built together? What matters to us here? How do you see this continuing? What are the things that would make you want to go elsewhere?
Do you think they need a therapist to help through that part of the transition, or do you think that can be done in isolation between the two of you?
So
I have to tell you, my gut on it is,
yeah.
It's a tough renegotiation. Whoever opens that subject, I think, is looking for a beatdown.
Seriously?
Yeah, I think whoever says, hey, I'd like to grab some coffee today. You have time? Oh, you have time?
No, but that's
and
not
say,
the way
I want
it
to rethink our
That's
marriage.
not the way it starts. Do you want coffee with latte or do you want to talk about our marriage?
I'm going to want to drink it in a very soft cup in case it gets thrown at my head, I think is probably. So how do you motivate? Because I think it's actually something. How many of you are married?
Or in committed relationships of any kind, please. Doesn't have to be.
It's like less hands went up. How could it? I mean, wow, this is really helpful, this book, as it turns out. Who's married? You get one, or in a committed, less hands. I mean, if that doesn't tell you the truth of the situation, nothing.
I usually ask it differently.
That way was
how
perfect.
How many of you are in a relationship? We just answered. How many of you would like to be in a relationship? How many of you would like to be out of the relationship you're in? At least on occasion.
This is also a good show of hands of the people who didn't come with the other person that they're with tonight. I tell you why I bring it up. We all know, anybody who's in a committed relationship knows that it's work. And so commonly, even outside a major crisis, you see people are not committed to the work. And we all know couples like that in our own lives where somebody's just so grossly advantaged and disadvantaged within it. But I think that the idea of how you broach this subject is a meaningful one because I think there's a lot of utility to it. Not to sanitize this or make it antiseptic, but life changes. You get married, you're one age, you're one set of dreams, one set of aspirations. Life changes and is made manifest in whatever happens between you. And there is a need for reapproachment and figuring out, well, how is it different now? Now we're raising kids. Well, now the kids are grown. Now what do we do? I mean, these are all huge things that certainly can't just easily evolve without any kind of reconsideration. And that's why I wonder, what is the right mechanism for that?
Look, it's very clear to me that every relationship, let me put it like this first. I imagine a world where people can experience a sense of vitality and aliveness in their relationship. Why? Because ultimately, it's the quality of our relationships that will determine the quality of our lives, more than anything else. Friendship hasn't changed too much in the last 200 years. Sibling relationship hasn't changed too much. If there is one unit that has undergone an extreme makeover, it's the couple. And in the past, You heard every fight that couple had because the walls were porous and the windows were open. Today, your friends can divorce and you're surprised because you didn't see it coming. That's the kind of isolation that most couples live in. More pressure to succeed, more pressure to be happy, more pressure to do well, and less input. More time with the kids, more time at work, and less with each other. With a list of expectations that's like that. So to then say that, you know what, on occasion, you go to a retreat, you go to therapy, you sit with a few friends together that you really trust, and you analyze life. Every other organism needs to grow in order to thrive. If it goes stale, it will fossilize. And what happens sometimes, unfortunately, is that this crisis propels people to actually, you know, what happens in the beginning of a relationship, you live face to face and you're gazing into each other. And then you spend years living side by side. And what this crisis does to some people is it puts them back face to face. To realize what they stand to lose, to realize that they actually love each other and they haven't said it to each other in so long. To realize that they actually wouldn't imagine a life without each other. And that raw pain is actually shared by both people. And it's that you want to reconnect them with. Because what do I want to know if I stay or if we work this thing through, is that we choose each other again. And we're starting a second marriage with each other. That's when this thing can actually produce something that you don't wish it, you know, it didn't need to happen for that, but sometimes nothing else seemed to have done it. Nothing else had the force of ravage that this thing could throw people in.
Questions from the audience? Oh, this is a good one. All right. When would you tell the non-monogamists, don't tell? P.S. That's my advice to friends who ask me, am I wrong?
It's a great question. It's a, you know, why do you want to tell? And what is it you want to say? Do you want to say, what is it you want to say? I've fallen in love somewhere else. I slept with somebody. I got stuck in a hotel. I have an STI. What is it you need to tell? Is that telling, caring for the person that you're saying it to? Or is that caring ultimately making you feel better? Do you have any idea if your partner wants to know, if that person's partner wants to know? You know, and you don't know in advance. So many people thought they wanted to know and then tell me, I wish I had never known. I can't get it out of my head, you know. But what I say is slow it down. Don't just say yes or no. Slow it down. There are consequences and a price to truth-telling, and there are consequences and a price to secrecy. And sometimes when a person asks a question, ask them first, do you want to know the answer to your question, or do you want your partner to know that you have the question? It's like, I want you to know that I'm thinking about this, but I'm not so sure I want the answer. Because once you have the answer, your entire life is about to change. When you have friends, I think sometimes the best thing is to let them figure it out and to ask them the right questions and not to push our own opinions on them. Because we never have to live with the consequences of that. They do.
What are the best words to use when you would like to end a relationship with someone and they want to work on it?
Those are beautiful questions. What you want is marvelous. What you want is beautiful. I wish on anyone else to have somebody who wants to continue and to persevere the way that you want to do it with me. But I don't want to anymore. I don't want to be with you anymore. I want to go. And I want you to bring that energy and that fervor and that commitment to someone who will be able to respond. I can't say goodbye without ever hurting you. This will hurt badly. I will live with that forever, but I have made up my mind. You have to be willing to own that you're going to break someone's heart, and that you're going to live with. You can't have it both ways.
I don't feel the same way about you now that I did before you said that.
I mean, this is one of the many versions.
Yeah,
but
that's
the one
just,
that
I
came
know,
out
but that's
now.
just terrible to hear. It really
Yes,
is.
yes,
It is.
yes.
It's just terrible. I'm not even focused on the questions now. I don't even know what I'm going to do now. How do you explain, this is good. How do you explain and define the infidelity to the children? Do you discuss or hide?
So, first of all, my first question is always, how old are the kids? The question is a developmental question. You do not answer the same way to a 4-year-old that probably should not be mired into the adult messes, to a 12-year-old who stumbled on your computer, or to a 40-year-old who doesn't understand why you are leaving their mother or their father, which they thought you have a life with, and cannot understand because you can't tell them, my husband hasn't touched me in 12 years. What are you going to say to them? You want them in your bedroom? No. So, by definition, you're going to try to say positive things about the partner, and you will be accused as the person who is unfaithful for destroying the family.
Who should do the talking?
I think that it is every parent with every child alone. You talk differently to different children.
Who goes first?
I mean, I have plenty of examples of the children. I have one case in the podcast, actually, in Where Should We Begin, where the children, 3 of the children, one of them doesn't talk to her because she chose to stay with him after he cheated on her for 40 years. And they think she has Stockholm syndrome, and they just cannot accept that they don't talk to her, let alone to him. Then I have the person who is the person who leaves with someone else and has never talked about anything to their children about their marriage. But why would they? And certainly not about what happens in the bedroom of their marriage. And then, when they leave, the adult kids, one doesn't invite him to the wedding, the other doesn't, So it's different scenarios with different children. You have, by that stage, a very personalized relationship with each child, and they will have different conversations with you. It's not a pack. It's not like when you have parents who are going to announce to their children that they are divorcing, and they're presenting, we will be changing our family from here on. This is a very different story. And the degree to which you involve people, I am of the belief that if your children are not part of that story, you don't involve them. I've had people who tell the 5-year-old why mommy is crying, and he should know. And they know what kind of a-hole his father is, and what is that doing to the child. So there is people who use the children to share with them their rage, their wrath, their broken hearts, their vengeance. There are people who have the children who stumble on a whole digital archive and need to help these children make sense of who is this father of theirs. When it's digital archive, it's a parent, it's a mother or father, it doesn't matter. Who is this person who just, what is all of this? And then it's a different conversation. And it's not a one-time conversation. This story is going to unfold over years.
I need hope.
Yes.
In the book, you talk about the hope of what can come out of this. How? This is all so withering and real and raw and hard and mean or neglectful, but ultimately all negative. How do you get to the point where what is the mechanism? What is the dynamic that allows us to move from a place that is so dark to anything that approaches light?
But this is what happens when you go through a crisis. It is danger and opportunity. And when you go to the hope, what starts to happen is that you begin to, the people, for me, who managed to transform this, will tell you, we have a relationship today that is so much stronger than what we ever had. More open, more honest, more intense, more alive. We wish it didn't have to go through this, but this took us, for a ride. And what I would not have wanted to go back to the marriage that we had. But depends when you ask. If I ask this in 1 or 2 years right after, no. What I went to do is I looked at people 5, 10, 15 years later. And they didn't say, when she cheated on me, they said we had a crisis. It became a we story. And we rewrote our story after this crisis. And we became the authors of the new chapters of our life. And, we really, it's something needed to change. And this is what made it happen. It becomes a very different way of talking about this. Those are the people who, when you go later, they say, there's such a sense of victory over not having let this thing ruin them and over having actually turned it into a better relationship.
It's not semantic, it's subjective, it's substantial. When they're saying it's our story, it's because that's what they decided to do with it.
Yes.
How do you consider happy endings? And the question had started and they crossed it out. What do you consider happy endings? But they crossed that out, although that would have been an interesting question also. So, happy endings, how do they fit into this?
I mean, what I just described is a kind of happy ending. A happy ending to the way that the story starts very dark and becomes hopeful. So that's one version. If I don't understand really the question.
I thought the question was going to, does that count as cheating?
Ah, that kind
No,
of
that's
happy
not what they
ending.
meant. That's just where my head is. I think that they're making, how do you find something positive in this? And that's what you were just talking about. But I'm saying the reason I ask it again in this way is because it's a little definitional, right?
I don't think of it in terms of happy endings.
Right.
Come on, it's like, no, it's not a judge.
But that's what we want. We want it to be better. We want that if we're going to go in there and we're going to do the therapy after something like this, we want to come out on the other side better, right? That's how we're
and
designed.
Sometimes the better is with you, with my partner, in the way that I just described. And sometimes the better is that I decided this was not the relationship I wanted to be in. And I was going to love differently and be loved differently than what you and I had had together. I think that for me, this is not about happy ending, but it is something that is an important point, is that we still in our society consider longevity the marker of success of a couple. I'm married 35 years. Half the time people clap. Like I'm some relic of the past, like I did it, and some relationships end, and they were good. They accomplished what they needed to accomplish. People had children together. People dealt with illness. People buried their parents. People dealt with earthquakes. People dealt with economic downturns. People supported each other. These were strong, good relationships, and they end. And I think that, to me, is an ending that needs to become included. That if by definition, when it ends, we say it failed, it's a failed marriage, we are not doing service, neither to the marriage nor to the commitment and the endurance that people have sometimes for 20, 30 years, and then it ends and we say it failed, it's not fair.
Is that PC? Right, that'll be the pushback. That'll be the pushback. That's political correctness. You're trying to make it all okay, but at the end of the day, there are moral absolutes. And you get married, it says till death do us part. Anything short of that is failure. This cheating is failure. You can spin it any way you want. Maybe we'll move past it. Maybe we'll stay together. But I'm not learning anything from it. If somebody cheated on me, this is about what they learned because they were the problem. This is hardwired stuff in people.
Yes.
Since the 1300s, when marriage came into common existence.
But can I give you a few others that were really hardwired and equally moral?
Yes.
Virginity. How many, come on, there are plenty of people here in this room who remember what it would have been like morally if you had had sex before marriage. So we used to marry and had sex for the first time. Now you marry and you stop having sex with others. And that was a moral, homosexuality, a moral and a pathologizing one. I mean, there have been so many, monogamy. Monogamy was one person for life, for all of history. I have patients who tell me, I am monogamous in all my relationships. And it makes perfect sense to them. One woman
That's
tells
a sociopath,
me, I have been
monogamous.
No, they have had 2 marriages. They were monogamous in every marriage. But,
all right, that's not what I thought you meant.
No. But these were absolutes. The idea that it would be one person for life. No, now it is one person at a time. The idea that when you married, you couldn't leave, even if you were miserable and beaten to pulp, you couldn't leave, especially as a woman. Because let's face it, this topic of infidelity is not a gender-equal story. This is a story that has had a double standard throughout history. Men practically had license to cheat. And women were punished for everything. If she seduced him, if she was the lover, and if, there is no homewrecker in the masculine. I mean, this whole conversation is rigged from all kinds of moral relative things. First, the fact that some people would say it is wrong, it is not what you promised, it is not in our contract, is a given. But for many people, the story is not about broken contracts, it's about broken hearts. And they need help to mend their broken hearts. And rage and wrath and moral judgment on them and on their partner and on everything they have created before doesn't help them. So we need, if it's that pervasive, we need something a little bit more compassionate. That doesn't make it right, that doesn't condone it, but it's helpful. But I like your pushbacks, it's good.
It was kind of half-hearted, to be honest with you. I mean, because I just don't believe that. I've never believed it. I've always thought that, I believe that there is, first of all, who cares what I believe? But here's why I'm giving some context to it. I see so much of this, I've spent years and years of my life cataloging disastrous marriages, because they spawn so many great crime stories that I've covered over the years. And intimacy between 2 people is always the basis of some of the most bizarre human behavior. But I do think that anybody who's been married a while, this Thanksgiving it'll be 16 years for me and Christina, for my wife. And I came from a family where, my mother and father were, my father used to wince when he would think about life before he was married. And it was real. Like, he really believed that. He really was like, I was not married at some point, but I've been married my entire life to Matilda. And they were of a generation where I don't care what happened. Now, being physically abused, being emotionally abused, that even for their generation, that was understood as something that was never supposed to be acceptable. But at the end of the day, it is so hard to stay married. It's hard for people. And people don't know this when they get into it. They don't talk about it while they're in it, unless they're like drunk or there's some flashpoint that everybody knows about, so they might as well talk about it anyway. And it's probably, I think, one of the most common realities that is ignored in normative behavior, if you think about it. I mean, you guys all say you have, except for their weird imbalance with the hands thing. I mean, if you're in a relationship, people tend not to talk about what is the most true thing about the relationship, which is that it's work. and that it's hard and that bad things are going to happen and you're going to have to find a way through. And what I've seen in the spike of divorces, which is new-ish, right? It's easier to get divorced now. It's not as expensive to get divorced now. No-fault divorce is much more prevalent. The social acceptance of it is better now than it was a generation ago. But when you hear people while they're getting out of it, I'm often very unimpressed by their reasons. And I'm of the school of thought, to the person who asked the question, I don't get involved. I spend enough time in controversy in my day job. In my personal life, I try not to get involved in these situations. But I often find the reasons that people are getting out are really petty, especially when they have kids, you know, and especially when it's male, that most traditional male dynamic of, like, you know, the kids get to be like 11, 12, 13, and all of a sudden, some guy starts to feel like he doesn't have his mojo anymore. And, you know, he needs to be revitalized. And all of a sudden, there's like some new person in their life that could be their kid. I mean, we've all seen this play out so many times. And while I don't judge the behavior, I do think that it speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding of the work involved and what the promise is and the duty is that's involved. But all of these things are subjective. That's what drew me to the book, was that you create a framework of some objectivity, the way you have to look at these dynamics if you want to make sense of them. You can make them whatever you want if you don't want it to be rational. But if you want it to be rational, you have to look at it. But this is probably, what's harder than this? What's harder than this?
Look, this one is among the most painful experiences you have because it is with someone that you're intimate with.
Right.
So to be betrayed by...
And definitionally, now you make a case in here not to make it definitional, but definitionally, this is the worst thing that you can do.
I'll tell you what's harder, but this is me personally. And this may be why I developed a more, not positive, but more resilient attitude to this experience, you know. And I never thought that these two were connected. But one day, it kind of... So I am a child of 2 Holocaust survivors. Both my parents were the sole survivors of their entire family. They were betrayed not by their partners, but by humanity. And they could have remained dead inside. Not dead, surviving, but without any joie de vivre, anything to strive for. And yet, they chose the other side. And I came from a community in Antwerp that was all Holocaust survivors, and there were 2 groups, those who did not die and those who came back to life. And I learned how people come through. Love again, trust again, have children, because, you know, in that world, you should better not have kids, if that's what's going to happen. And that gave me a real faith that this is possible. They never doubted it, that life was worth living and love again and make families and have sex and have pleasure and go dance and all of that aliveness. And from that place, I draw my inspiration when I work with people who are shattered and think like this whole life that they've built has just been smittered to pieces. And then I start to rebuild it because I know it's possible. Not for everybody and not all the time, but there is absolutely nothing PC about that. I believe that that is a true source of resilience. Because when people say, when trust is broken, how do you heal? And I think to myself, you know, I'm going back to Viktor Frankl, and I'm going back to my parents. The story has been written. This is not the first time. Now, sometimes you will heal it with somebody else, not with the person who just broke it. But that's it. I've said it. I'm going to read another piece.
Please.
It's called From Suspicion to Certainty. Certainty is searing, but gnawing suspicion is its own kind of agony. When we begin to suspect that our beloved is duplicitous, we become relentless scavengers, sniffing out desires' carelessly strewn clothes and clues. Sophisticated surveillance expert, we track the minute changes in his face, the indifference in her voice, the unfamiliar smell of his shirt, her lackluster kiss. We tally up the slightest incongruities. I kept wondering why she had so many early meetings at the office when she's supposed to start at 10. Her Instagram posts didn't match where she said she was. Dates don't lie. It was puzzling that he had to take a shower and put on deodorant before going for his run.
That's a rookie mistake right there.
All of a sudden, she was so eager to invite Brad and Judy to dinner when for so long she didn't even like them. Does he really need his phone in the bathroom? At first, we may keep our questions to ourselves, afraid to falsely accuse if we're wrong, even more afraid to face the facts if we're right. But eventually, the desire to know trumps the fear of knowing, and we begin to probe and to interrogate. We test, asking questions to which the GPS has already given irrefutable answers. We set traps. Every dark secret I'll discover better by pretending, since a scheming Figaro in Mozart's classic opera. We act like we know when we only fear. Anton tells Josie he has proof that she has been sleeping around. There's no point in continuing to lie about it. You can tell me, he says. I already know everything. But it's a bluff. Feeling caught, Josie tells him more than he ever had bargained for. Now he can't get the images out of his head. In a common twist, Josie tells me that initially Anton's suspicions had been unfounded. However, as his snooping increased, so did her frustrations and evasiveness. Eventually, resenting her life under surveillance, she says, he was so convinced I had been cheating on him all along that I decided to do it for real. That's not a positive piece. I should find a hopeful piece. I will look for a hopeful piece.
I'll wait. I love that you were, I had made a note that you consulted on the Showtime series, The Affair. And that scares me, that series. They shot it out on Long Island, right? That's where I live. And that is now, what did you think when you started reading through what they wanted to do that? I'll buy you some time to find something more positive than that dirge that you just read to us there. When you started reading what this was going to be about, what resonated with you in that story? You guys know the show, The Affair, right? Okay.
So, one of the lines that became very clear to me, and one of the most surprising findings when I began to look at this thing is, why do people in happy marriages cheat? He has a very good relationship. He loves his kids. He's happy with his wife. He doesn't like his father-in-law. Okay. Is that sometimes when you turn to the gaze of another, it isn't because you're looking for another partner, but it is because you're looking for another self. And he wasn't trying to leave his wife as much as he was trying to leave who he had himself become. And that doesn't make him likable or anything like that. But that notion that this man had an enviable life, living in Park Slope, you know, he had an enviable life. And this had nothing to do with his marriage. It has nothing to do with the relationship with his wife. So it was what? It was the fact that he had decided, you know, that when he met his wife in college, he needed structure in his life. He needed somebody who was going to ground him. He needed somebody who came from a family that could provide something. He needed someone to give. And then, you know, his demons caught up with him. But that you only know in series 3. In series 1, what you know is that he meets this woman, and she meets this man, and she lost a child. And I did learn to ask many people who are in affairs, have you lost someone in the last 2-3 years in your life? Because I began to see that for many people, the presence of mortality is what will often push them to do that thing that they never thought they would do. It could be in all kinds of parts of life. This is just one situation. And a parent who dies, a friend who goes too soon, and bad news at the doctor. I can't tell you the amount of people who have affairs when they have been sick themselves. and they come out of there, something about mortality makes people say, is this it? Is there more? Am I going to live like that? And it gives them that boldness that they would never have had before. And so I start to see her. She had a great relationship with her husband also. It's like, you know, they had lost a child, and there was a grieving, and that she couldn't leave herself anymore. She saw it everywhere, and so she throws herself into this complete abandon, where she, you know, and they destroy 2 sets of families. I mean, but you know, you're going to make me again talk, and it's not going to be positive. It's not going to be hopeful.
I don't make you say anything. I don't think anybody could make you say anything,
you know.
by the way. Well, but here, look, of course, if you could be Pollyannish about this, if you could be, you know, if this were such an obviously optimistic situation, we wouldn't need the genius that you apply to your book. I wouldn't have done this if I thought it was a no-brainer and it was easy. It's the difficulty. It is the need to sometimes confront things that are hard that make your expertise so valuable, not just in the clinical setting, but for the rest of us who just want to read through this so you can have it in your head. And if you're open enough to challenge some of your assumptions, and see, that's what I was trying to get to earlier. I think it's hard for people to do that. I really do. I think it is harder now.
Did reading the book change anything for you?
I am open by nature.
I have heard so many people write to me who have read this, and it's just coming out, you know. I started out, you know, but you made me see things. You made me forgive my father. You made me forgive my mother. You made me understand. I have a person in there who literally thinks that it is the worst thing that can happen to then realize that his father and his mother were actually in an affair, and he was the child of that relationship. I mean, people discover things about themselves, you know, and that's a change of perspective. It's not just
Absolutely.
What do you think about, is it a good thing or a bad thing? That's not the question that is asked. It's really, do you get to understand the complexity of the human drama that comes through this without having to go to the opera? And do you understand that when you read this, you actually will also know how to create a relationship that can develop the buffers to possibly prevent it or preempt it?
I think that not only do I agree with the premise, I think that what the book does is you don't have to have this in place in your relationship for you to learn from the dynamics that's surrounding how to survive it. Mm-hmm. Because if it's not this crisis, it's going to be something else. And that was eye-opening for me. And also just the idea of what goes into both sides of it, the symptomatic nature. You know, your section, not to help you find your own section of your book, but page 226 I had marked, when the affair preserves the marriage, and the passage on 227. Do you think that might fit the bill of what you'd like to leave the audience with?
You already 226, 227. I was actually looking. No,
and
that's
I'm the
not...
dumb one.
Yep.
You see that? What do you think of that? No? Does that fit the bill for you or no? It's a great tease, though, for those 2 pages of the book, isn't it? Aren't you like, what's 226, 227?
I was going to read you, actually, from the Transformers.
This is it. So I want you to end the way you wanted to.
Yes.
Ironic,
Okay.
given the whole context of the conversation.
As twisted as it may seem, Matt and Maggie's perspective has a logic. Many people have affairs not to exit their marriages, but in order to stay in them. I have 3 more years till the kid... No, this is not a happy piece.
But I have a different take on it. But go ahead. Go ahead.
Now let's do a question.
All right.
You will read
I may spin away, but I won't let go. My heart says yes, but my head says no. A gentle hug will pull me back in for another dance. Is it such a sin?
Ah, yeah, that is a beautiful passage. That is true. That's on 227.
Yeah. Book's better than you knew. So, I've never had that happen before interviewing an author. This is an interesting question. I'm not sure I understand it, but maybe you'll understand it. Last question.
Yeah.
Have you ever counseled a couple who are themselves the perpetrators of an affair? Would you consider that constructive?
Have I ever, yes. Have I met couples where both partners were the people who were unfaithful in their respective relationships? Yes. I have not met their partners. In those situations, I don't meet both. If this is the couple that shows up, I will not meet the spouses. So let's be very clear. And what is the question, if it is constructive?
Yeah, what do you do with that?
So one of the couples that actually I wrote about in the book, they had known each other in college. They left, they both got married, they both lived at different sides of the Atlantic, and they reconnect. And they are absolutely torn. They have kids, they have young children, they have partners. One has a better relationship than the other. They have no desire to leave the kids, to not be there, and they are absolutely torn. And that was the conversation. I often do entire day sessions, and I sit and I let them figure it out. And I just give them a safe space where they can actually think, talk, maybe say goodbye to each other, which they probably have already tried to do umpteen times. When I meet that couple, that particular couple, I don't feel like I'm sitting with perpetrators. I'm sitting with two people who are in a crisis of love with each other and with their partners. And I don't have an answer for this. I can humbly lend my skills for people to figure out their own self-determination in their life. And that's what I do in those moments. I can't remember which page they're on, but you'll recognize them.
Noted psychotherapist Mr. Rogers once said, in a time of crisis, look for the helpful people. We have things that are difficult in marriage, and they often revolve around infidelity. We need the helpful people. You are one of the helpful people. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for talking to me about it.